Hi class, so I've looked at all of your images carefully. I've downloaded all of them and I've set your grades. So you guys can all see your grades already. And then what I'm gonna do for this assignment is I'm gonna do a critique for line, for shape, for pattern, and then areas of improvement. So you'll all have at least one of your images critiqued in the line, shape, and pattern. You might have more than one image critiqued in that area. And then we'll see some images also in that area of improvement. So opposed to going through every single image where this critique would get really long, we'll just go ahead and split this into some sections. And we won't critique, like I said, each of your images. So this first image that we're going to look at is by Megan. And we are looking at line. The focus on this image is nice and sharp. It's all the way back into the image where the line is coming through. The exposure looks good. She was at ISO 100, 25 millimeters, so pretty wide angle, f14 at 1/200th of a second. And the light is hard light. Now, hard light in the middle of the day isn't going to be the best light. But as we wait until it's earlier or later, hard light can work well because then we get the extra aspect of these shadows. And that's what we're seeing here. This was shot in the morning. And instead of just having the light come straight down, she has this whole extra element that is really what her image is about with the shadow. So we're looking at the line created by this tree. And I find that really interesting. And I also think it's very telling of where you are as a photographer, that you're starting to notice these things that you probably wouldn't have before. So this is a great example. It looks like there might be something on your image sensor. So pay attention to that. See if you see those spots in other images of yours, if there's another one there. And photographing a plain blue sky will generally show them the strongest. If it is dirty, you're going to have to get your image sensor cleaned. All right, and the same with this image. So this image is by Ayana. And the same thing, I think she probably looks out at this scene all the time. And she's not noticing the line. She's not noticing all of these power lines and telephone lines that are going back and forth through her scene. But now, as she has an assignment in front of her that's about line, when she looks out, she starts to see more lines. So she's really breaking up the scene by showing us these lines and creating a sort of a barrier, so we can't get back into the scene. We can't look at all of these trees with the piece that we want to because there's all of these lines over it. So another interesting image. You're at ISO 100, 75 millimeters, f 5.3, 5.6 at 1/250th of a second. So those settings all look good and your exposure looks good on this image. Now this image is by Brad. You're at ISO 100, 28 millimeters, wide angle, f3.5 at 1/750th of a second. So in this instance, I would encourage you to use a smaller aperture. So instead of f3.5, you could shoot this at maybe f16 or f22. Then you'd have to have a slower shutter speed, but you could set up on a tripod if you need to, and you have a little bit of a ways before you need to be on a tripod for this image. But we want to have as much depth of field all the way into the image. What works really well with this image is the way he's sat himself. So he's using this line to guide us back into the image. So shooting this as a vertical image was really smart. And then we follow this line back and it comes into these trees. Like, it doesn't quite make sense that this would lead into trees and into a barrier opposed to into railroad tracks that continue. So it's a really interesting image, and it's because he's using line, he's pushing that narrative of where the railroad tracks are actually leading. So having that totally in focus would work better opposed to having an out of focus with the shallower depth of field. Nice job with your image here. Great job using your line not just to be a visual element, but to also start to tell more of a narrative here. This image is by Leah, and you're at ISO 200, 24 millimeters, f16 at 1/15th of a second. So I would make some adjustments here. Instead of shooting at f16, you could open up your aperture more. So shooting at f11, f8, f5.6, that would be 3 stops more light. So to get those 3 stops of light To get control of that, you would have to change your shutter speed. So instead of 1/15th of a second, you could shoot it at 1/30th, 1/60th, 1/125th of a second. Then you wouldn't have to worry about any camera shake. And we're seeing a little camera shake here. So remember to balance that out, that you want to have a fast shutter speed in order to be able to hand hold. What we're seeing here is we're seeing the lines of the side of a building. So what I appreciate about this is that you're just looking at things differently, and opposed to shooting it just straight on and showing us these lines on the building, you're taking a harder angle. So we're seeing these lines as they move us back into the image. So we're following each of these lines back. So that's working really well here. This image is a little underexposed, so I would open it up. Probably about a stop more exposure is your correct exposure. This is a really dark image, so pay attention to that image sensor, and I'll talk about this at the end. Where students are photographing white, you need to make sure you're overexposing that because your camera's trying to make that area middle gray. And then this is our last image for Line, and this is by Tiffany. Now, what I appreciate about this image, which I appreciate about most of these images, is just how you're looking at things differently. I'm guessing this is your home, so you're going through this gate every single day and not really paying attention to the lines. But you can see how many great lines are here. I even wonder if you could add to this and add more depth to this by maybe photographing from the other side of the fence, in allowing us to see the fence and also see the overlapping of the fence lines here. I think that could be really interesting to see the shadows and see those through the lines of the fence and have this really complicated layering of lines. You're an ISO 500, 35 millimeters, f11 at 1/640th of a second. So all of your settings look good there. Nice job looking at something in a new and different way.